We will be live momentarily. I am going to mute you on the phone until it's time for questions to be asked. To unmute your phone, if you would like that, when that time comes and it's time to ask a question, it is *6 on your phone. Okay, Ruth.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'm Ruth Phillips with the Town of Orangeville, and I just have a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. Please note that this meeting is being aired on public television and/or streamed live and may be taped for later public broadcast or webcast. If participating by phone, your name is part of the public record. Participants are welcome to watch the presentation by visiting youtube.com and searching for Orangeville Council. Participants may also call into the meeting with questions or comments. To do that, please use the phone number and the conference ID information available at the bottom of the YouTube screen. As well, contact information will be provided at the end of the session so that you can email the consultants or myself with further questions or comments. With us this evening are Scott Walker of N. Barry Lyon Consultants Limited, or NBLC for short, and Steve Weaver of the GSP Group. They'll be providing members of the public and our business improvement area stakeholders with an overview of the potential development options for the properties located at 82 to 86 and 90 Broadway. Welcome, Scott and Steve, and I'll turn things over to you.
Okay, thanks, Ruth. Hopefully, can you hear me all right?
Yep.
Perfect. Okay, so I'm going to launch the presentation right now, but while I'm doing that, I'll just I'll say a few words. I'm just going to find my my presentation first of all. Here it is. Okay, so thank you very much for having us here. This is a really important project with the town, and we just, you know, Steve's going to be saying a few things about the planning framework a little bit later on, but I'll start it off by explaining what the project is, and then Steve will take over for a little while, and then you'll come back to me, and then I'll talk about the actual process that we're following and what the next steps are, and I'll try and explain what we're looking from the public. So here's our site. This is 82, 86, and 90 Broadway Street. It's a pretty important site, prominent in the town. It's about 1 acre in size, and it's right across just south from Town Hall. And it currently has about 120 parking spaces. And the whole goal of this project is to try and put a use on this site, to redevelop it with something that will please a number of stakeholders, and hopefully all the town residents and town businesses as well. We're asking a lot of this site, but there's a good chance that we might be able to fulfill some of these ideals. So I'll just keep going here. So this is specifically what we're looking for, and I've only listed about 10 things here, but really there's probably about 50 objectives that we're trying to achieve with this one site. And our study is basically examining the feasibility of accommodating all of these things on the site, and whether it's feasible through a redevelopment partnership with a developer, or through a sale with conditions, or a ground lease, or a joint venture. A variety of ways we can do this. But first and foremost, the site, you should know that the site is co-owned with a BIA. So the town, I believe the town owns the majority of the ownership stake, but the BIA does own a piece. So they're very, very involved in this process, and have a big say in what should happen on this site. Currently, one of their objectives is to increase the number of parking spaces, and right now we've got 120 spaces. They want 180 spaces, but they'd also like it to be designed in a way, and this is understandable, that has good lighting, is safe, preferably not underground, if at all possible, and phased in a way. If you're going to do a development on the site, they want to phase it in such a way that you keep some of these spaces active for use by patrons to the local establishments. Heritage Orangeville is looking for similar things, but they're more concerned with fit and the scale of the project and how it relates to other buildings on the street, how it relates to the Heritage Conservation District, and Steve will talk about that in greater detail. And then the town, of course, the town is concerned with all these things, but they're concerned with a lot with implementing the policies of the official plan and things like animating streets and intensifying the downtown, putting more people in proximity to these shops, and supporting retailers through that. So ideally, if we can do all these things and more, and I haven't gone through the whole list here, the land value, hopefully, for this site, the air rights would exceed the cost of doing all these things. So that's the goal here. In terms of process and methodology, the first thing that we're trying to do is we're trying to figure out what we can do with the site from a land use planning perspective, and Steve will talk about that. So he's done a detailed review, and so we know what the existing framework is right now, and we've come up with some ideas in terms of concepts of what we think can be achieved through an amendment to the zoning bylaw, and then we've tested out these concepts in a preliminary way, and of course this whole process tonight will feed into this and could modify our concepts and require further evaluation. But we take these concepts. We've done a market review to try and figure out our revenues for a residual land value model. And just so for clarity, for those of you who don't know what that is, it's a model whereby you figure out the land value, and you do it by figuring out your revenues, and you subtract all your costs, your hard and soft costs, and an estimate of profit, and whatever's left over is your land value. So that's how our model basically works. And so we've tried to figure out that land value estimate, and then we relate it back to all the costs. And in this case, the costs are primarily related to parking. And so we reconcile the parking costs against the land value, and if our land value exceeds it, then we're in good shape. And if it doesn't, then we've got some work to do. So today we're looking for further input. We've already met with Heritage Orangeville, but we'd like more input from members of the public to talk about the scale of the project and the land uses. Do you think these land uses that we're testing are appropriate? And I will hand it over to Steve, who will give you a little bit of backdrop on the background on the land use planning framework.
Okay, thank you, Scott. Good to be with you, everyone, and look forward to your comments on what we're presenting tonight. And for our part, both myself and Sydney Bailey from our office, we are planning and urban designers, and we've been reviewing the site from those lenses, both in terms of the overall planning policy framework, zoning, and other instruments that apply to the site, its surrounding context, existing conditions, and so forth, to see what the opportunities and constraints are, as well as from a design perspective. And you'll see in some of the concepts and 3D images that we've prepared for the site, we've explored some different options for the site and begun the process of trying to visualize that, not at an extremely detailed level, but at an overall kind of massing and height type of level of detail, to provide some framework for analysis of different options. So on this slide, just to give a little more context on the property and its surroundings and where it's positioned in the town and in the downtown, it's very central to the downtown core, as shown in the larger image. And of course, to the north of the site is Town Hall. Or areas to the south are predominantly residential, and there are some open spaces as well associated with the Mill Creek and Mill Square Park to the southwest. To the north, you have Alexandra Park behind Town Hall, and then again transitioning to a residential area as you move north from the downtown. You can see in the smaller image in the bottom left of this slide some of the existing access characteristics and connections to the surroundings. So in the green lines, we've just shown where there are existing sidewalks, pedestrian crossings, and connections with the surroundings to the existing parking area on the site. You can see we've also identified the surrounding uses of the buildings in the area, which are predominantly mixed use, so a mix of commercial at the ground floor predominantly, as well as some residential apartments in certain buildings above the ground floor. We've also noted, of course, the vehicular access to the property. There are 2 points, 2 driveways into the site, one from Broadway at the northeast corner of the site and one from Armstrong at the south kind of center point along the site boundary. And then we've also noted in red, it's a little hard to see on the slide, but there's a red dashed line within the site. That reflects the current zoning setbacks that are required for any buildings on the site. So there are no setbacks in the downtown CBD zone from the front and side lot lines for new buildings. There is a 7.5 meter setback from the rear yard, which would be Armstrong Street in this case. And next slide.
Shoot.
Is it stuck, Scott?
Yes.
Okay. So we do have some photos to show you of the existing conditions. Yeah, I'm sure most people in the meeting have been by the site, and it's as I say, directly across from Town Hall. We've just provided some photos at the street level of the buildings on either side. I don't know if you want to try, maybe Scott, ending the screen share and then restarting the screen share to see if that kicks it back into gear.
Okay. Okay. You see that?
Okay, yeah, so there's the photos. You can see in the top image, this is looking southwest into the site from Broadway. You can see the building to the east of the property is a 2-story building with a pitched roof and kind of a board and batten finish. The bottom left image is looking again from Broadway at the other side of the site on the west side. And the adjoining building to the west is a 2-story building with a flat roof and brick facade, commercial on the ground floor. And then the directly across the street, of course, is Town Hall, one of the most significant heritage character buildings in the downtown. Just in terms of your existing official plan framework and what it means for the site. So the property is within, or the properties are within the central business district, which is the primary area for a mix of commercial and other government, institutional, civic, residential, and community land uses. One of the goals of the official plan for the CBD, or the central business district, is to increase residential densities through multi-unit development in either mixed use or single use buildings. So what that means is increasing the number of residential units and the availability of apartments in the downtown, either through apartments above the ground floor with commercial at the main street level, or even with some buildings that are exclusively for residential. There are directions as well in the policies about respecting and complementing the existing built form, color, materials, and scale of surrounding buildings in the downtown. So that's something that we've carefully considered as well in exploring the different concept options. At the back of the site, you see there's a bit different shade of orange or red, and that's a designated intensification area in the official plan. What that means is that this is an area specifically targeted in the official plan for development at higher densities. So again, bringing in residential development, mixed use development, but making sure it's sensitively designed to the surroundings and appropriate for the core area, through urban design, compatibility analysis, shadow analysis, and also promoting sustainability and green building technologies. Next slide. In the zoning bylaw, the current zoning of the property and the surrounding area is CBD or Central Business District zone, and there are a range and mix of land uses again permitted in the zoning, similar to the official plan. In the zoning bylaw, dwelling units are restricted to upper floors, and multiple dwellings multiple dwellings are permitted, including ground floor residential on lots that do not abut Broadway. So this abuts both Armstrong and Broadway. It's possible that there could be ground floor residential for a building on Armstrong, but for any building tucked up to Broadway, the residential component would be limited to the upper floors under the current zoning. I've mentioned the setbacks, and we've shown those in the previous image. There is an overall building height maximum of 23 meters, which is somewhere between 7 and 8 stories generally for most commercial and mixed-use buildings in the CBD zone. However, following the preparation of the Heritage Conservation District Plan in 2002, there was a special provision added to the zoning bylaw prescribing a maximum height of 12 meters, which is more in the range of 4 stories for land that is fronting on Broadway. The lot coverage, so this is basically the amount of the properties that could be used for buildings, is 75% of the lot area as the current maximum. I mentioned the Downtown Heritage Conservation District Plan that dates back to 2002. That's really an additional planning tool that allows the town and through the Heritage Committee to apply some additional review and criteria to redevelopment and new buildings and any changes to existing buildings in the downtown core in the Heritage Conservation District, or HCD. I will just make quick note that there was a commercial building at 90 Broadway, so you can see the area highlighted in kind of a pink purple color on 90 Broadway, where there was a building formerly designated under the Heritage Act as part of the Heritage Conservation District, but due to the structural condition of that building, it was demolished a number of years ago. The Heritage Conservation District guidelines encourage compatible infill, development that's sympathetic to the heritage character of the downtown area, but while balancing that with the need to provide for contemporary requirements. There is no intent through the Heritage Conservation District guidelines to mirror or try to replicate past building styles. Basically, it's really trying to develop in an integrated way. But not necessarily trying to make a new building look like a very old one. Continuity of the visual landscape and balancing aspects like building proportions, roof, windows, colors, materials, so that all of those things are addressing the heritage character of the downtown area. And next slide. There are additional guidelines as well applied through the 2005 Commercial Urban Design Study. These guidelines get much more detailed, and I won't go through all of the points here, but suffice it to say there are a number of criteria that apply to both the redevelopment of existing buildings and any new buildings and property development in the downtown. A few things to highlight here. Again, emphasis on that consistent street frontage along Broadway, pedestrian-oriented development, addressing that minimum building height of 2 stories, discouraging, blank walls, long monolithic facades, and making sure that the patterning, materials, colors, and window placement on buildings are similar to what you see on other buildings in the downtown. With respect to parking, making sure that parking is located to the rear of buildings. You will see we've explored a couple of different options for parking in the concepts that we've prepared. And we have, although the guidelines speak to having a parking area behind a building and not with a street presence on Broadway, we have recognized in one concept that there is a parking area right now that covers the entire site. And there may be an opportunity for a kind of dual purpose parking and event space on Broadway. That's an idea that came out of the Parks and Recreation Master Plan draft that's currently underway. And then, of course, there's other criteria related to outdoor display and signage and other details that development in the downtown area is expected to address. I mentioned the draft Recreation and Parks Master Plan. So you can see through that master plan, an idea was generated and some concept work was done by the consultants that prepared that document. This is not an approved concept for the site, but it's something we considered in looking at the site and some of the options. So this is actually oriented the other way. So north is to the right. The site is in the left-hand side of the image. You can see there's kind of an angular yellow colored building or beige colored building facing towards Armstrong. And then the front of the site along Broadway, you can see a number of different colored vendor shelters there. So basically the idea from this concept would be that the site would have a dual purpose of maybe even three functions, where you have a building at the back, you have parking as well as event space in the front. And particularly they were looking at the possibility of accommodating the farmers market at the front of the site along Broadway. This would also combine the site with, temporary closures of Broadway and the use of Alexandra Park for multi-venue event space for larger events. So you'll see with the number 2 at the at the east limit of the site, that would allow the site or require the use of the site as a traffic rerouting when Broadway is closed for events. The image on the right is, kind of a rendering that was prepared by the consultants who did the master plan of what that view from Broadway might look like in a kind of farmers market concept. And next slide. So at this point, I'll turn it back to Scott. He'll go through some of the precedent images and ideas that have been reviewed as part of exploring some options for the property, and then some of the concepts. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Steve. Okay, so this slide here, before we get into some of the concepts, we thought it was useful to take a look at other examples along main streets in South Central Ontario, where we had building heights that were in the range that would be permitted or were originally envisioned for this site, meaning between 12 and 23 meters. So the image on the top right, that's Markham Village. That's a 4 to 5 story building. There's a step back in behind there. You can't quite see it. So that's something that would get you to about to about 17, 18 meters in that range. And then we have Stouffville's right below it. That's Pace on Main condos. Again, it's 4 or 5 stories. And we were envisioning this as being an appropriate height for the Broadway street frontage. But on the southern part of the site along Armstrong, we included a 7/8 story project up in Collingwood. And we thought, you could probably do that there and it would still be in keeping with what's in the area. I believe there's another condominium project that's 6 stories along Armstrong, just to the west of the site. So that's how we started off our approach. And then we came up with three scenarios, and we're calling this one is scenario 1. And we had in the back of our mind that this was going to be a tight equation, that the cost of providing parking is really expensive. And so we had to come up with a low cost scenario. And to do that, we wanted to have a higher percentage of surface parking. Surface parking costs about $6,000 to $7,000 per stall. It's relatively affordable. And in this layout here, we managed to preserve about half the site. And you can see there's a dashed black outline there, which shows where the excavation would be for the underground parking for the mixed-use building on the north side of the site. So we have this sort of low-cost scenario with a modest building along Broadway, a 4-story building stepping up to 5, and in this scenario, to get to the 180 parking spaces that was our goal, we could provide 66 spaces, parking spaces at grade, and then another 114 would have to be underground, probably on 2 levels. So so this one has its strengths and weaknesses. Obviously, the strength is that it's a low cost exercise and has a lot of surface parking, but there are underground spaces, and I know the BIA does not look favorably upon that if you have too much of it. So, and in this building, we would have 5,000 square feet of retail facing Broadway, and the building would be about just under 41,000 square feet is what we've drawn here. And so this is what it would look like in terms of profile. So, going clockwise around, starting in the north, the top left corner, we have a view to the north, across Armstrong to the site, and you can see how it lays out. It's positioned along Broadway, and if you move clockwise, you can see in the top right corner, there's not much to look at along Armstrong Street because it's parking, and we threw a few trees in there just to show that. And the same goes for the bottom left corner. That's a view to the northeast, and then we have the opposite view to looking southeast across Broadway with Town Hall just in the lower left-hand corner of that image. So that's what it would look like. It's a little bit bigger than its surroundings, and I guess there's one thing I should point out in these massing images. This is the town's file here, and what it omits is it omits a lot of the architectural detailing that are on some of these buildings. So you're missing the gabled roofs, the peaked roofs. So some of these buildings are actually a little bit taller. So we tried to figure out a way to add some of that, but I think it's beyond the scope of this exercise. So this is the image that we were able to provide you with. We have some more images later on that show a street view, but I'll move on to the second scenario here. So this scenario, this one is it refers back to that Market Square scenario that Steve was referring to on the north side of the property. So what if we kept surface parking on the north side, and of course we've drawn it in a fairly fairly straightforward manner here. We haven't put any design flourishes in here. There's no paving. We haven't shown all that type of stuff. But that obviously you would if this was going to be a permanent square, you would do something like that to try and elevate the space a little bit. And in this scenario, the building that's on the south side of the site is actually a taller building. It's about 8 stories, but it steps up from the 6-story height limit, and there's actually a 2-story. We've shown a 2-story sort of townhouse row along Armstrong as well in the southwest corner of the site. So, in order to achieve the BIA's objectives here, we have 49 surface parking spaces, and we have about 131 underground spaces. You'll notice that there's a range of numbers here. I've shown 101 to 131. We used 150 to 180. 150 was the original number that we came up with, and the BIA asked that we try and test out 180 to see if it would work. So that's what we're going with here. And in this scenario, the building's a little bit bigger. You have about 94,000 square feet of residential space, and you still have about 5,000 square feet of retail, which faces the square to the north. But it's a well set back from Broadway. So this is what it looks like in terms of rotating around the site, and the top left corner image is across Armstrong to the site, and it's we've tried to break it up a little bit, but again, this is a massing model, so you're not going to get all the design details, like the windows and the recessed spaces and the spandrel and everything else, and cornices and things like that. So this is how it basically presents in its plainest form. And it's a slightly bigger building, but it's removed from Broadway Street, and it takes its address from Armstrong. And finally, scenario 3 is a far more complex scenario. This one is it's a more expensive scenario because it has structured parking in the middle of it, which feeds underneath each of these 2 buildings. So we're taking the 2 built forms from the other 2 scenarios. But we're threading in two levels of structured parking beneath them to try and get an efficient parking layout. And for structured parking, the cost per stall is about $40,000 per stall, so it's more expensive. Not as expensive as underground, which is $52,000. Which these are estimates, of course. That number is always moving. But you can see why our strategy is to try and stay away from underground try and maximize surface, and then failing that, we'll try out structured parking. So this is a very complex project, but it's one of those ones where it works really well in the sense that the roof of the structured parking could be an outdoor amenity for both of the buildings. It'd be a green. You could have a green roof up there. We have a north-south driveway system which connects both streets, and that helps with connectivity in the downtown. And in terms of the density, it's by far the most dense of the three scenarios. So you have about 124,000 square feet of floor area, of residential floor area. Then you also have 5,000 square feet of retail along Broadway. This one works well from not from an interim parking perspective. So trying to keep part of the site alive for interim parking, it gives you about 20 spaces. The other ones are able to give you far more spaces than this one would, like in the 50 to 60 range. So this one is weak from that standpoint, but it hides the parking well, and it would inject the downtown with a larger number of units and residents. And this is how it looks. Profile view. So you can see it's a little bit bigger project. It's a little bit bigger than what the downtown has right now. And but we'll let you comment on that and give us your feedback. And here's some street views. So this view is from the northeast looking southwest to the site. So we have all three concepts on the same page here, and you can get a sense of how they differ. Concept 1, again, that's the building pushed towards Broadway, 4 to 5 stories. Concept 2, it's 6, 7, 8 stories pushed to the back of the site. And concept 3 combines the two of them. And here's another view from the opposite side. It's the same side, it's along Broadway, but it's from the northwest side. And you can sort of see how, I guess in concept 2, you can see that market square potential there. Although we've modeled it, but we understand that there are other options for that scenario. Alexandria Park could be one of those things, and so that's something that council will have to figure out. And just as another side note, we haven't mentioned any of the financial aspects of this of the three scenarios because we want council to hear that first. But we can tell you that for all three of these, 180 spaces, it is a shortfall. So we have to sharpen our pencils and try and figure out a way to bridge the gap there, whether it's a subsidy, whether it's providing relief for visitor parking, whether it's finding new revenue tools, through consultation with the BIA. Maybe there's more paid parking here to offset some of the shortfalls. So that's where we're at right now. And our next consultation is with the BIA this week, and we'll be talking to other developers to solicit their interest in the site. We'll take the feedback from tonight and these other meetings, and we will modify our concepts and refine our analysis. And then in Q4, we expect to go before council with our findings. So I guess I'm going to open the floor here to questions, and I believe Dan, you're gonna feed us those questions. But one thing you should know: if you don't get your question read tonight and answered, you can always email us. It's Ruth and myself. Here's the email addresses, and I believe this presentation will probably be posted online. So we'll have to get the details for that and post those as well.
Okay, so we do have 3 members of the public with us online, or 3 phone numbers here. So it's *6 again to unmute your phone. So if you can push *6 on your phone one at a time, and please ask your question. And so far, I don't have anybody unmuting. So it could also be possible that they were just here to listen to the presentation. But again, it's *6 if you have a question, *6 on your phone to unmute it, and you can ask your question now. Okay, so I do see one individual has unmuted, so please feel free to ask your question.
Hi, it's Allison from the Orangeville BIA. I'm the general manager, and I'm not sure who I'm speaking to right now, but I just want to let you know that I am one of the people that is on the call, and so I really don't have a comment that we can't talk about at the BIA meeting on Thursday morning. But I think these are really interesting. I was really surprised to see the kind of the third option. That was a big surprise to me, which is very cool, and I think it's very creative. So, is there any? There's obviously you're just the boxes in the. It was kind of hard to see because when you were talking, the delay on the actual images on the screen were quite a bit delayed. So, and I think I missed when you were talking about the conceptual design for the design of the building. What stage would that come in? That's when it goes to the developer stage, I guess. Because I'm just worried that if we show these big white boxes to the public, they're going to be like, what is that? Like, it's going to be hard for them to
Yes.
visualize.
So one of the issues that we have with showing massing is providing too much detail, and if you make them give them too much personality, you run the risk of painting a picture that might either inflame the public, or it might not be representative of what the developer might do in the down the line. So we don't want to prejudge it too much. So we're trying to keep these buildings as generic as possible. Understanding that whatever has to happen here has to fit in on some level in terms of materials and color and massing and sculpting and recessing windows, trying to match up things and make it work. It doesn't have to be obviously a faux Victorian design, but it can be contemporary, but it'll have way more personality than what we're showing. I think it's a dangerous thing to put that out there.
Right. Okay. Understood. And the next question I had for you. So the buildings on either side of these two properties, one has a parking pad at the back of it. That would be, I believe the address is 94 Broadway. And so they would have no access to that parking pad based on these designs. Is that right?
No, I think they would. I mean, this is so preliminary. You can find a way. I mean, we're just trying to test out a model, but I think this site is large enough that there's always going to be a way to to thread access through it and find a way.
All right, excellent. And then access to, so none of the buildings would be up against, like I'm thinking the train station on the one side at the rear of that's off of Armstrong Street. That building itself is a kind of it's a sensitive building. It's not a heritage building, but it's heritage, a design, like a redesigned or it's a reproduction of a heritage building. So we have to be pretty sensitive to that too. And so I'm sure Heritage Orangeville talked about that a bit. They
did. They mentioned it, and I think whatever. Let's say we ever got to an RFP stage. One of the conditions of any design that went on the site would have to be you'd have to have a building that was sympathetic to that structure, because that's the old train station. So we tried to push our buildings away from that. That was the strategy there, so that we wouldn't you wouldn't have a dramatic step down to that. It's a 1.5 story building. So we tried to, our strategy in our design was to push the buildings to the west side of the site.
Okay. Excellent. All right. Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, we still have another two individuals on the line. If they have a question or comment, they can unmute and ask. And it's star 6 to unmute again if those individuals are having issue unmuting.
I think everybody's shy tonight.
Yes. Some people do just join to listen as well, so that could be the case as well.
Right.
But I'm not seeing these other, the other two individuals are staying on mute.
Okay. So what is the next step from here?
Well, we're going to meet with you. And then we're going to we're also going to meet with we've been talking to some developers. We're going to talk to a few more, And then we're going to go back to the drawing board and take into account what we've heard so far, and that includes, we've heard comments from Heritage Orangeville. And you know, the building massing might change in some of them a little bit, but it won't change too much, I'd imagine, maybe a story here or there. And then we're going to give our, you know, we've already done our financial analysis on a preliminary basis, but we're gonna you know, go back to drawing board, try and figure out ways, if there are ways to remove the shortfall, provide some ideas, and we'll see. We'll bring it to council, and we'll see if they, with some recommendations, and they may or may not choose to move forward with the project.
Right. Okay. And the other question I have for you is, so you've given the square footage of the buildings, and I know it's really up to the developer to, you know, like this is just, it would be just a guess on your part, but the square footage to me doesn't really mean anything. But I'm curious how many units that could translate into, as far as residential and commercial units on the bottom. Like, I know that I wouldn't hold you to this, but I'm like, in version 1, is that
Right.
4 residential units and maybe 3 commercial units, or you know what I mean? Like, if you can just give me a ballpark.
Sure.
So
So for scenario 1, I don't know if you can see it right now. There is a lag right now. I've got a bad network quality message here.
yeah.
Is it? Can you see it there?
It's a bit delayed. Yeah, it's delayed. It's always a couple of minutes after you finish and you say that there's a new picture before
Okay.
it shows up on my screen. So it's just a bit delayed.
So for
yeah,
that's about.
Sorry, I'll interject here. Your presentation is actually delayed on the screen. It's not switching to that slide. If you did, it's still
really?
on the one with your email, so you have to unshare and share your screen again. And sorry, yes, YouTube does have about a 2-minute delay from the live event here, Allison. So it will be about 2 minutes delayed.
Yeah, no worries. And like I said, this I understand that this would just be a total ballpark figure, and I wouldn't hold you to it, but it's just, I'm not very good at kind of figuring that stuff out in my head. I don't really have that.
No, I can
Gene,
easily
I
give you. I can give you some of our assumptions. Can you see it now?
So it will be coming out to YouTube in about 1.5 to 2 minutes.
So what we for this one, we we have about 27 units, but that's based on our market analysis. We think that these will be end user buildings who will want to have a little bit more space, and so they're pretty large units. They're depending on the scenario, we de-risk scenarios. So this scenario with a smaller building would have larger units. We use 1,150 square feet per unit. And then for the other scenarios, because there was more GFA, more floor area to sell, you de-risk it by making your units a little bit smaller by bring the price point down. And in that scenario, so for the scenario 2, we had 94,000 square feet. So that's probably around an 70 to 80 unit building. And
Okay,
then
so that's 80 residential units. I'm sorry.
Yes.
Clarify.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the
78.
commercial would be on the bottom separate from that.
Right. Yes.
Yeah. So that's a lot of units. Like, that's
Yep.
a lot of people living downtown. Okay. And so that was the second version with the building at the Armstrong side of the property.
That's right.
Correct?
And then
Okay.
scenario 3, that one was 123,000 square feet. So that one is probably around, it's closer to 100 units.
Oh, okay. I'm surprised it's not more because it looks considerably bigger.
It does. I think we should have painted the top of our parking structure green, but a lot of that is parking structure. It eats into the first and second floor of those buildings, so you lose a little bit of floor area.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I understand. Thank you. Okay, I'm sorry, and I think I missed the first version where the building is up close to Broadway. How many units did you say that would be?
Well, we had 27, but it's going to change. I think, but who knows? By the time we get to if this does go to an RFP, and by the time they get to actually market the project, it could be 2 or 3 years, and by then they might go to a smaller suite size, and you could have more units than that.
I understand. So at this point, we're looking at 27, 80, and 100, based on just you and your kind of guesses
Right.
at this point. Yeah. Okay. All right. That's excellent.
Okay.
Yeah. So it just gives me an idea of how many, how many extra people this means living downtown, because, you know, of course, at the end of the day, that's a good thing, because those people who live downtown are shopping downtown and dining downtown. So thank you. I appreciate that.
It could help offset some of the if we can't get to some of the parking objectives, the public parking objectives, that could help offset it.
Right. And so speaking of the parking figures, I mean, I know we gave you a tall task, so I appreciate you working hard to get there. But so the total number of we said 180, is that, but that wouldn't include all of the parking that the units would require.
Yeah, that's separate. Yeah. So we've assumed that the parking for residents would be below the respective buildings in these drawings. And so we were trying, the strategy would be, we've assumed the strategy for the developer would be to put public parking at grade or in structure, or maybe one level down, maybe two if we need to get there. You know, in this scenario here, that I think is on the screen now, scenario 3, we have one level underground and 2 levels above grade. So, and the residents would be below those.
Okay, and so when you gave those the estimates for the number of parking spaces, you did not include those residential spots that would have been required for the units, because they're kind of in a separate area.
Yeah, they're totally separate. Yeah.
Okay. Yes, because I think that's really important, that you make sure that it's really clear, because the first thing people are going to jump to is, well, if there's a bunch of people living there, they're going to take up most of the 100 and however many parking spaces you were able to get in the public area. And so we actually have less spots than we had before. So I think it's really important that you make that really clear to everybody, that it's the public spaces plus the private spaces you were able to include in development.
And so how do you feel about so visitor parking? That's one of the ideas that's on the table here, where we remove visitor parking requirements. And so any visitors to this building that don't live there would park in the public parking garage. Obviously, their primary intent would be to visit whoever's in the unit, but they could also walk around and shop and visit restaurants as well. So how do you feel about that?
Well, I mean, I know that a lot of people who have 2 cars are using visitor parking in order for their own vehicles, right? For residents that are living in whatever building, but they don't have their own spot. They
Right.
Like they have multiple cars, but only one assigned space, so they use visitor parking for their vehicle. So we have to assume that is going to happen here too. And assuming that there is a charge for that, that they would have to pay a fee.
Right.
Personally, I can see how that would, it's reasonable, I suppose, as long as it wasn't free.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. I mean,
Right.
I'm speaking as the general manager here, and this is just off the top of my head. This is not me speaking on behalf of the board.
Right. I understand.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And I guess it would depend on how many units. So if there's 80 units and there's only 80 assigned parking spaces, and those units are big units, and there's going to be 2 cars per, they're 2-car families, even though they have 1 assigned space, that's an extra 80 parking spaces. So that wouldn't be okay. Do you know what I mean? It would really depend on which of the versions, the design concepts that were chosen, I suppose.
Yeah, well, we've assumed one. You're correct there. We've assumed 1 parking space per unit, because we know we can't go below that here. The transit isn't good enough to justify going below 1-to-1. But you're right. There will be families who have who might have two cars. I guess we'll have to think about how you treat them, and if it is a paid parking lot, maybe there's a rate that is reasonable.
Right. Well, I mean, imagine if the units are small, they're 1-bedroom units, chances are it's going to be, 1 or 2 people living there, not an entire family. Or if it's a seniors building, chances are they're more likely to only have one car instead of
Right.
2. So I think it really depends. Like you said, you can't know this based on these concepts. So we just have that. I think it's a wait and see thing. But I was just curious. So to know whether or not the residential required parking was included in those figures that you gave me, and I'm happy to hear that they're not. So that's great. Yeah. Thank you.
All right.
Okay, I believe we can do one last call here for any other members of the public that wish to ask a question or comment. Star 6 to unmute your phone. Okay, seeing none. I believe that's all the comments via phone.
All right.
Well, thank you
Okay,
very
so-
much, gentlemen. I really appreciate it. And
Thank you.
it's on the call too. And Ruth, thank you very much for taking the time tonight. And I will speak to you on Thursday.
Sounds good.
Yeah, excellent.
All right.
Oh, okay. Hold on. Sorry, 1 second.
Sure.
Someone is texting me about a question. Sorry, could you bear with me for just a second?
Sure.
Okay. Sorry, just 1 second. Oh, okay, yeah, so they were asking about the sight lines for the BVR, so the restaurant in the train station building. And so will that be protected? And we kind of talked about that briefly, right? Like I already asked that question.
Yeah,
And
I pulled up an image here. I don't know if how long the delay is, but I've got the scenario 3, the massing model images there, and you can see in the top left corner image, we have the Barley Vine building represented as a 1-story building, and so we have
Right.
our driveway going right by it with landscaping and so forth. But that's something that I'm sure through the site plan process, through detailed comments from staff and from Heritage Orangeville, you could sculpt that building a little bit better, maybe have it transition a bit more. Right now we have basically a 6-story facade facing it, plus a step back.
Right.
But it's well set back. It's probably about 20 meters from that building.
Okay, so that's, I mean, it is visible from the other, well, depending on what happens to the small lot to the west of that building.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Okay, and then the other question was, so, yeah, and I guess they just need to make sure that they have access to their garbage bins and that kind of stuff. So it's kind of logistical issues with them.
Right.
They just want to make sure it's not really going to interfere with their operations. And, so I'm sure that something can be jigged so they still have access and it looks better, putting a fence around it or something. So it's,
Right. Yeah. There's
Yeah.
going to be ways. I think town staff would make sure that their service was not interrupted.
Yeah, excellent. I mean, I know, like I said, we understand that these are just concepts to sell to developers, that they're not, written in stone or anything. So we just want to make sure they just asked me these questions, so I thought I should mention it. But thank you very much. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Okay, I believe that is it for questions for this evening. Ruth, if there's any closing remarks.
Thank you, Dan. No, I have no further comments at this point, except to say that the presentation will remain on YouTube, Dan, I believe.
Correct, yes.
Although it's live now. So if in the next few days, if there are any BIA stakeholders, Allison, or there are other people watching tonight and have additional stakeholders or members of the public who might want to view it and then submit comments, they're more than welcome to do that, and then reach out to Scott or myself, and we'll make sure the messages get relayed to the appropriate person. As Scott mentioned, we're also going to be meeting with the BIA Board of Directors on Thursday morning at 9 o'clock. So if there are members of the BIA who would like to approach one of the board members or let their thoughts be known to Allison or one of the board members, we'll be happy to receive those comments on Thursday as well. Thank you all for your participation and for coming. And thank you, Scott and Steve.
All right. You're welcome.
Thank you.